This is Fesa
This is Joe Cole.
This is Ruben Loftus-Cheek, and you're listening to the London is Blue podcast.
All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode of the London is Blue podcast. As always, host Brandon, joined by my co-host Phil, or at Chelsea Youth. That's right, we have an Academy end of season special for everybody out there. We've done it on the women's team, we've done it on the men's team. I was not going to shortchange you, Phil, and not let you wrap up the Academy season. Do not worry.
The Academy season ended a little while ago, and there's been a lot of time to reflect and think about things. So long ago, in fact, that some of the development squad boys are actually back in training this week. We're not even into July, and we're talking about next season. But here we are, reflecting on what happened last season, which was a tumultuous affair, to say the least.
Yeah, a lot has happened, to say the least. It was an interesting season, but we're going to get into all of that. In case you aren't following Phil on Twitter, it is at Chelsea Youth. Obviously one of the de facto voices in what's going on at the Academy. We're going to be summarizing the end of the Academy season. How did it go? We had the 18s, we had the devs. You could kind of talk about the 19s, although that was a quick flash in the pan. We'll talk about the new dev squad head coach, Mark Robinson. We'll do our own version of KSL-ish, for the Academy. We're not going to sit here and tell 17, 18-year-old kids, bin him, sell him, get him out of here. That's not what this is about at that level. And then we'll go ahead and wrap up with the end of season awards as well. So it'll be a nice hybrid of some of the other episodes we've done on the men's and women's teams. Blend it and make it a little bit more appropriate for the Academy, and then we go from there. So, Phil, just to kind of kick it off with a summary of the end of the season and kind of how it all went. The dev squad, right? Not what you consider a massive success overall. So let's call it a character building season.
Character building indeed, and I think that was the way that Andy Myers reflected on it. This is a team that is familiar with being at the top end of the table, competing for league titles and for major honours. They spent the season at the other end of the table fighting relegation and managed to pull off the great escape with 3 minutes left in the season, a dramatic finish and all of that. It was a chasing experience. It was a learning experience. There were a lot of tough times for these boys to overcome. And Myers, reflecting on things at the end of the season, said that the biggest obstacle they had to overcome was the physicality one. These were 17, 18-year-old boys in an under-23 league that admittedly most teams will field under-19, under-20 sort of team. But they lacked physically in the majority of matches they went into. And that will come with time and that will come with development. But that was one of the chief reasons that things didn't often go their way this year. But what that does encourage is you have to dig in, you have to fight, you have to work hard, you have to scrap for your lives. And it's to the team's credit that they were able to do that and keep themselves in with a chance of staying up during a really hard run at the end of the season where 5 of their last 6 matches were away from home. And those 5 were in a row. They had to go all over the country trying to pick up points left, right and centre so that they could keep themselves in it. And we're not going to forget about the season. We're clearly not going to dwell on it because it didn't go the way we went. But those experiences will set these boys up well, not just for next season, but for the rest of their careers, because facing that sort of adversity at this age can make or break players. And in these cases, I think it will make more than it breaks.
Well, I mean, and it's an interesting time for them as well, obviously in their career. I mean, after the dev squad, you really are kind of moving, either up to the first team or out, to kind of whatever the next level is. Again, not we expected. Already made some coaching changes to it, which we'll kind of get to. I just realized as I was looking at the Academy management squad that I forgot Claude Makalele is at Cobham.
Yeah, he's part of the ever-shrinking loan department, which has lost a few people over the last year. Paolo Ferreira being one of them. It's really Makalele and Carlo Cudicini running that department now, which used to be Eddie Newton's baby as it was. Andy Myers will be joining that department, as we'll discuss with the change of head coach in a minute. But as the loan army operation naturally declines because of the way that the first team excess are being sold off or running out of contract, and the speculative signings of the Michael Emenalo era are less of a thing now. They may come back up again under Todd Bowley, we don't know. We're talking about Gabby Slonina as a potential long-term member of the Loan Army. So if that signing is indicative of something to come, maybe the department grows again. It's very scalable. They can add and remove staff to it depending on the number of players they have out on loan. And that's important because you may end up with a summer where there's not that many academy players who want to go out on loan. They're not at that right point in their careers, and you may end up with a summer where you have 2-3 times as many who are ready to take that next step. And it's important that Chelsea keep the versatility within the academy staffing structure to support these boys out on loan at the right times in their careers.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, 18s finished mid-table, upper mid-table. I mean, they were in for a shout at the title until towards the end. It dropped off, though, definitely at the end. Got the FA Youth Cup semifinalists, won the U18 League Cup versus Fulham. So a successful season, but definitely there was more to be had there. The common theme with this team was they score a hell of a lot of goals. Just defensively, you didn't really know what you're going to get on a certain day.
Exactly that. So they were top of the league at Christmas, scoring plentifully and gearing up for a run at both cups as well. And when he was looking back at the season, Ed Brand pointed out that the real disappointment was that Youth Cup semi-final defeat at Nottingham Forest, because they were 3 minutes away from reaching the final against Manchester United, a Manchester United team they'd already beaten in the League Cup, which they went on to win the final against Fulham. And there are moments in this, it's a real what if, because I think it deflated them for their league campaign, where they were still in with a chance of winning at that point. And they lost 4 of 6 in that span, and it killed 2 of the 3 trophies. It was really nice to see them finish the season on a high, get a first meaningful trophy in 4 years with that League Cup win against Fulham. There were lovely scenes at full time, seeing some of the boys celebrate, and it would be remiss of me if we didn't pay tribute to Eric Asiedu, who unfortunately passed away the week before last. He was nominally the under-18 academy kit assistant, but he was more than that to so many players, past and present, a mentor figure, a father figure, one of the happiest people that you can ever encounter. He was one of the culture drivers in the building. Neil Bath paid tribute to him and said, you've got the headline makers within the academy, but it is really a cast of hundreds, and people like Eric make the place as special as it is. And there were scenes of celebration at full time at Craven Cottage where the boys were celebrating with him, they were mobbing him. It's a real tragedy that he passed away too soon, and when I think back to that final, I'll be thinking of Eric and the celebrations that went on there for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was definitely very recent, and affected. And you saw a lot of messages from club staff for sure, which just goes to show you the impact.
I think just the players that have passed through the academy, the first team is now players who have made successful careers elsewhere, players who are still within the academy, staff, players, everyone. If you came across Eric, there's no way he didn't touch your life, and the tributes are a testament to the man.
Yeah. Okay. So again, 18's pretty good overall. And now that we've had a month to reflect everything that's gone on, how are you seeing, I guess, the dev squad kind of removed? I know it's kind of an ever-evolving door. I know the 18s were quite young at times this season. But yeah, I guess starting with the dev squad, how have you kind of like looked back and seen it all shake out from your probably perspective going into this season with the players that were there? And maybe you can talk about a little bit of some of the players that you expected that were going to have big roles and maybe delivered on that. Or, I don't really want to put anyone on blast, so we'll do the opposite, or maybe someone who surprised you, who you weren't expecting to have a big role, but ended up doing very well.
Yeah, I think if we go back to the last summer and sort of the season previews and what we were expecting, nobody's expecting a relegation battle at that point, but there were concerns. If you looked at the team that finished pre-season, it was a very disrupted pre-season, still with COVID hanging around. There were injuries and absentees, and they finished pre-season with a 37-year-old Jimmy Smith playing in the team. He'd recently retired from a distinguished long-lane career, coming back into the academy to do an academy scouting role, but ended up being pressed into action playing for the development squad and helping out with the coaching staff mid-season because Eric Ramsey had gone to Manchester United. And they finished with him and George McEachran in midfield, and that isn't the ideal way to go planning a season, which you'd already lost significant players from the development squad, not just headline names like Tino Livramento and Lewis Bate and Miles Harris all leaving permanently, and the likes of Levi Colwill and Tino Andrean going on loan, but you'd lost the next tier of players down. No disrespect to them, but Pierre Eckwer left, Charlie Wiggett left, and El Simiu left, and that's how the team became younger, less experienced, less physically capable, and they'll go into this summer knowing that they need to support those younger players with a couple of older boys that you might bring in recruitment wise. There's going to be a different look to it. You've got Mason Burstow, who signed from Charlton in January and then was left on loan there. He'll come back in. He's got a physical presence up front. He's played a season of league football on and off for Charlton. They're about to complete the signing as we speak of Eddie Beach from Southampton, who is an 18-year-old goalkeeper, Wales Youth International. He will add competition to the goalkeeping department, but with no lack of experience, he was on standby for the Wales under-21 team at the last international break, so there's quality there. They'll start to... The core of the team will still remain academy developed, but don't be surprised if there's a little bit more stronger recruitment at this age group than usual, because the whole league is moving that way. The Premier League are going to change it from being an under-23 to an under-21 league this year. It really won't change much for many teams. It'll force some of the older hangers on to move on, although they can still play as overage players. But the arms race in academy football is so strong at the minute. It's so tough, so competitive with the narrowing scope of recruitment because of the Brexit rules, that you're going to go out and get your players at whatever cost, and it's the new way of competing at that level. So the development squad, they'll learn their lessons. They'll come back stronger. They've got a lot of players coming in from under 18 age group now. They've graduated, and I'd be very much surprised if they were in the same predicament next term as they were this.
I mean, probably quite a few returning faces though as well.
Yeah, there should be. There'll be boys who are definitely better for a year at that level, or someone like Charlie Webster will step up and be a key component this year and expected to be a leader, whereas he sort of bridged the divide between 18s and 23s last season. Players like Brodie Hughes and Lewis Hall, who played half the season as first-year scholars, they both made their debuts at squad level at 16, which is uncommon. They'll be so much better off for that year. They both played 40-plus club matches across all the different age groups. Hall obviously made his first team debut as well, which was an outstanding achievement. They'll be the core of that development squad. They're still young, but they've had that season to learn now, and you'll be looking to them to carry the team forward. Whereas you might be looking at some of the older boys. Xavier Simons may go on loan. Harvey Vale may go on loan, for example. And the challenge is to replace that talent, not just on the pitch in terms of what they can do, but the leadership aspect of it as the younger boys come up from the 18s.
Yeah. All right. And speaking of the 18s, any surprises or people that stepped up that you absolutely were unsurprised at their performance? I'm looking at some of these pictures and I forgot, right? They are children, Phil.
They really are. The majority
crazy.
of them are 16 years old. Some of them
Billy
17,
G.
turning 18. Billy G, we'll talk about him. He's ostensibly a central midfielder who played the majority of the season as a centre-half in a team that really lacked centre-halves. So you had him and Josh Tobin, both midfielders, doing a very good job at centre-half at times, but that's part of the battle you have to overcome at academy football. Sometimes you work with what you've got. You can't just go out and sign a centre-half that easily in academy football. Chelsea are in a position to do it better than some other clubs, but when you don't have what you want, you need to find a solution, and it's to their credit that they've been able to round out their development in such a way that now they've got the ability to play in multiple positions moving forward in their careers. It gives them options. It gives other clubs options when looking at them for a potential loan or several years down the line, whether they're going to move on at Chelsea or somewhere else. It's that sort of versatility. It's someone like Zane Silcott, who can play either wing-back role, spent a lot of the second half of the season playing as a number 8 or as a number 10. Some of that is education or some of it's tactical. So you can say, right, we know that you can do this out here. You've got a high technical foundation to your game. Let's see what you can do inside. There was a lot of experimentation with the team this year and a lot of rotation, a lot of players playing different roles and different positions, probably far more than in any recent academy season. And that's probably the nature of the modern Chelsea academy footballer. You look at the boys who've made it into the first team. You've got Reece James, who can play anywhere on the pitch and pretty much be the best player out there.
Apparently left back for England.
Yeah, exactly. You've got Trevor Chalobah, who plays the right side of the defence. You can slot him inside into the 3. You can maybe move him over to the left because he's done that very well out on loan. You moved him into midfield. We've seen Tuchel do that. Mason Mount, he can play as a wide forward. He can play more withdrawn. Is he better as an 8 or a 10? These are all things that pretty much everybody who's ever come through the academy is able to do a great job in one position, but a very good job around several positions. Ruben Loftus-Cheek, right wing back, who'd have thought it? But the education they're getting in the academy through moving around different positions, sometimes through necessity, sometimes through part of their action plan, is a really underrated point that not too many people consider. And there's an argument out there for specialism. You are a number 7, you're a right winger. That's the only thing you're going to play and you're going to perfect it. Or you're going to have the more rounded education that gives you more options in your professional career. And I think it speaks volumes that Chelsea's players have such a high track record of success moving into the professional game that it's the right way to go.
So in general, you feel like identity of Chelsea's academy, nothing changed, just really dealt with some adversity at the older ages. But like business was usual as far as the operations of the academy.
Yes and no. Obviously, running a full season like this after a full season under COVID restrictions was an immense challenge for everybody involved to get back up to speed and to make sure that the environment was safe for everybody. So a very huge well done to everybody involved in pulling that off, because the season went almost seamlessly. In terms of the philosophy of the academy, we've heard Neil Barth talk about the Vision 2030 and how it's evolution as much as revolution. You have to continue to move forward, to find new ways to innovate and to take your team and your academy to greater heights in an even more competitive market. The foundation of what Chelsea do and the substance of it doesn't change very much. But I think we're going to see a younger team as we move forward at this age group start pushing the best first years up, like Lewis Hall, like Brodie Hughes, into the dev squad earlier and earlier, because the talent demands it, the depth of talent demands it, and the quality of talent demands it. The academy is what we know it to be. I think it's always going to be this sort of academy, and I'm looking forward to see what evolution comes in the years ahead.
For sure. Love it. Well, one change in the dev squad managerial role, Mark Robinson, former Wimbledon manager and previously ran their academy, has joined Chelsea to take over as manager of the academy. Am I correct that you said that this wasn't really a surprise?
Not a surprise that they replaced Andy Myers, whether it was performance related or not. We've spoken numerous times about how the academy like to make staffing changes every 3 years or so to make sure that there are opportunities for the next generation of coaches to come in, to keep further in the progress of coaches as they move up the ladder, and to keep things fresh and to have different takes on teams management. So this came to the end of Myers' 3rd season in charge of the dev squad, and he's moving off into the loan department. The surprise was that they had an external hire for this position, because it's not something they do very often. 18s or 23s, particularly over the last decade. You've had Ed Brand, Jody Morris, Joe Edwards for the majority of the last 10 years. Adi Vivash was initially an external hire, but he'd spent a good few years in the academy before he took the under-18 job. And you really have to go back to the late, great Dermot Dromey to find somebody who'd been recruited to come in at either of those age groups and take over straight away. Before that, Steve Holland had done so for the reserve squad as it was back then. He's gone on to great things for club and country. But in this case, they've gone out and they've hired Robinson, who was in charge of Wimbledon for just over half of last season before he was sacked. He had one of the youngest teams in the Football League. More than 20 of Wimbledon's squad were under the age of 22. Most of them were familiar to him from his time running their academy, bringing it up from pretty much nothing to a Category 3 operation under EPPP. He had Henry Lawrence on loan from Chelsea there last year. He had Luke McCormick, who's a former academy player, and he had academy coach James Simmons as his assistant for the first half of the season. Simo's now in Norway as Tor Andre Flo's assistant at Sondal, continuing his individual development. But that all means that Robinson had a a prior existing relationship with staff at the academy. He'd done a presentation to them to convince them that Simo was it was a good move for him to go there as an assistant on a half-season secondment. He is a lifelong Chelsea fan. He once moonlighted as a stadium tour guide at Stamford Bridge as part of his personal development to improve his presentation skills to audiences. That was in a different life, sort of 2006, 2007 time. But he'll come in and he'll also bring this dose of reality that I always appreciate the academy having. A lot of academy coaching programs within England have this cookie cutter mentality that's almost out of the Barcelona playbook. Play 4-3-3, build from the back, pass, do this. Whereas Chelsea have sort of prided themselves on having that little bit of edge to them. They're not afraid to go direct at times. They're not afraid to train the physical combativeness that you need when you get into the men's game. And watching Robinson's Wimbledon teams and the way he's talked about it, you can see that flows through his preference as well. Wimbledon were a real up-tempo team when they were on song. They would press rapidly from the front. They weren't shy of switching the ball from side to side, getting it forward in a direct but not long ball manner. And he'll be a real asset to the team, I think. Just a new way of thinking that still meshes really well with the academy's core values. And he's proven that he's very good with young players. So all aboard the Mark Robinson show.
Okay. So obviously feel pretty bullish about that. Positive, which is what we want to hear. He's obviously has a high level of managerial experience, which will translate to a lot of those kids at that level, because if they're looking for a loan into that level or, kind of what the standards are, I'm sure he will be telling them like, I am managing you the way I manage Wimbledon, the standards, the expectations, all that stuff, which again goes into development. So I was surprised that they didn't promote from within, but with the dev squad, I totally get it. I think that it checks a lot of boxes, makes a lot of sense, and there was still a lot of opportunity to be promoted kind of underneath that team, I'd say as well.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Great. Well, hey, hate to hit pause on the party, but we're going to take our ad break. When we get back, we're going to hit the KSL-ish and then jump into end of season awards. So thank you to the sponsors for financially supporting the show, and we'll be right back. All right. Our next partner has a product that I use literally every day. I started taking AG1 because, well, it's hard to get a lot of micronutrients in. We're all focused on our macros with protein, carbs, and fat. And now we got to add the micronutrients from fruits and vegetables. It's just hard to eat that many servings a day. So I started doing it just to make my life a lot more efficient. I'm getting better gut health and a more durable, resistant immune system. So what is this stuff? Well, with one delicious scoop of AG1, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food, sourced superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging, all of the things. Again, I do it. It's easy, it's fast, it's quick. I throw up my shaker usually on my way home from work, drink it. It goes down quickly. And like I said, you get 6 servings of vegetables a day very easily. But hey, don't listen to me. Athletic Greens has over 7,000 5-star reviews. It's recommended by professional athletes and is trusted by leading health experts such as Tim Ferriss and Michael Gervais. So right now it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. It's just 1 scoop in a cup of water every day. That's it. No need for a million different pills, supplements to look out for your gut health. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/LondonIsBlue. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/LondonIsBlue to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. All right, I was excited to do the KSL-ish with you, Phil. Obviously, like we said, it's not quite a full KSL loan because of the nature of development. They're young players, and that's also just not how it works at that level. But it is a way to structure discussion about some of the loanees approaching key junctures in their careers. Could you imagine if we did this last summer and then all of a sudden that exodus happened, Phil? How bad that would have gone down?
Probably a good thing that we didn't. And let's hope that we're not tempting fate by doing it this time around.
No, we are intervening this time, Phil. All right. Mm-hmm. We have seen what happens and we are taking
This is an intervention.
Action. Yeah. All right. So it's going to be more of an integrate into the first team, loan again, or potentially consider selling. So the first one up was a big, a lot of excitement around him in the full men's team, KSL. But that's Conor Gallagher. You and I had kind of talked about some conversations. It just felt like his loan went so well, and he's had 4 loans that have gone really, really well, and he seems to just continue to rise to the occasion. What's your take on Connor, the official Crystal Palace player of the season?
Yeah, you rightly say he's had 4 loans, all of which were wildly successful. He went from Charlton to Swansea to West Brom to Crystal Palace. And in each of them, he was arguably the club's player of the season or one of their most influential players. And the expectation is that he's going to be a part of Thomas Tuchel's squad next season, which is all we can ask for a player who has repeatedly answered the bell when he's gone on loan. He is a full England international. He's a Premier League midfielder who can score goals, who can cover so much ground. He can play in a number of midfield roles, and there's a lot of discussion about whether he can play in the 2 in this 3-4-3 that Tuchel's persisted with at Chelsea. And I don't buy the argument that he can't. There's some learning that he'll still need to do it at the higher level. But anyone who watched him play for Jody Morris's wildly successful academy teams knows that he was part of that too with Billy Gilmour for pretty much that entire run. And yes, it's a different standard of football, but the education of playing as a part of a 2 in a 3-4-3 midfield doesn't disappear. He'll have a foundation of knowledge of what to do in that role, and then you take instruction from Tuchel and his staff about how it needs to be executed at a higher level. Everything gets faster, everything gets more demanding. It doesn't necessarily reflect on what he's done on loan at Palace and West Brom. That was a completely different circumstance. If you're the player in that squad who can get forward and score goals because nobody else can, then that's what you're asked to do. And Patrick Vieira has been entirely vindicated in asking him to do that. But now he'll come back to Chelsea with the option of playing as one of the withdrawn 2 behind a striker, for example, but also the option of playing in that 2 in the right circumstances against the right opponents and learning with another string to his bow. Like we were saying, the more you can do as an academy player, the more options it gives you at senior level. The only other option for Connor, if he's not going to be integrated into the first team squad now, is to move on permanently, which I don't think anybody wants. There's no shortage of offers out there for him. You could get 30-40 million for him quite easily, I imagine. But when you have an asset of that quality, that proven Premier League quality already, who's still extremely young, and you can bring him in at no cost while you've got other holes to fill in your squad with a limited budget, it's a no-brainer. He has to be integrated this year. And by integration, this isn't, let's bring him in, let's make sure he starts 50 matches this season and kicks Mateo Kovacic out of the team. That isn't what we're talking about. This is going to be a 55, 60 game season again with a World Cup in the middle. Having somebody like Connor who has a tremendous engine and an ability to play against teams of all different standards means that you make him a part of your squad and go from there. Everything else is on merit.
Friendly reminder, he has quite a bit of captain leadership responsibility from the academy time as well. So
he does.
He is not shy in a dressing room, I can imagine. Speaking of his partner in that Jody Morris midfield duo, Billy Gilmour, this is the one I kind of said to you. I was like, is it fair that I feel like Connor's progressed more and in a better spot to be integrated in the first team than Billy because his loan went so much better? And you had some obviously very wise tweets to the fact of like, long story short, don't forget Billy bossed Liverpool twice 2 seasons ago. Maybe you're implying that Norwich maybe drug his abilities or like his ability to impact a game down just because of how just tough a season it was.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think the loan to Norwich was the best idea with hindsight, but I don't think there was widespread criticism at the time, so you can't go overboard with the criticism now. A good loan doesn't necessarily mean you're ready, and a bad loan doesn't mean that you're not ready. We've seen what Billy can do for Chelsea at a relatively high level on a small sample size. And that wasn't just the man of the match performances against Liverpool and Everton. It wasn't just a very good showing away to Manchester City in a heavily rotated team. It wasn't just all of the other performances he's put in. He's a regular for Scotland as well now. And fine, Norwich were almost historically bad in the Premier League. Very few players are going to shine in that environment. But you look for the positives from a loan. This is something Eddie Newton always talked about. If things didn't necessarily go well in terms of statistics and performances, What has Billy taken away from this season? Well, he's played 2,000 minutes in the Premier League. He's had to condition his body, which isn't a big body by Premier League player standards. He's conditioned himself to be able to prepare, play, recover, and go again at the age of barely 20. So that experience alone will serve him well whatever he does next. The club have triggered the additional year in his contract, which means he's now contracted through to 2024. But that means that what we do with him this summer becomes even more important, because if you loan him out, let's say, to Frank Lampard's Everton, which is an easy connection that several people have made. Everton are losing some midfielders by choice. There'll be a gap there. Lampard gave Gilmour his debut and trusted him implicitly. We know this. If you loan him to Everton and he has a starring role, you get to next summer, and then you can't extend him again unless you get into negotiations with him. You're into the last year of his deal at that point. And he has the power at that point to say, well, I'm not going to sign a new deal, so then Chelsea will have to integrate him or sell him. The extensions gives you more options, but it makes what you do with him this summer even more important. It's very hard to justify in bringing him back into the squad at Cobham with the number of midfielders that they already have, unless you lose somebody. It's a little bit of a leap to suggest that he can come back in and play 30-odd matches, but not as much of a leap as you might think, because he's already played for Tuchel, he's already played at a decent level for Chelsea, and has all of the technical attributes that you want to be able to perform. In terms of what will happen, I wouldn't be surprised if it's another loan. Personally speaking, I'd integrate him and play him again. And figure out however many players you need to figure out after the fact, whether you need to change formation or whatever. You're going into a season, there's 25 matches for club and country before the World Cup. It's a ridiculously packed schedule. And yeah, fine, Scotland aren't going to the World Cup, but that will play into Billy's hands wherever he is, because he'll be fresh to resume and hit the ground running once they come back into the Premier League, whereas whichever club he's at, he'll have teammates who've been away at the World Cup and need a little bit of recovery time. So there's so many different factors and wild cards coming into this season that he'll be an important option to whoever has him. I'd like to see him at Chelsea. My instinct is that he'll probably go on loan again.
Yeah, look, and this is something we tied into the other ones. You got to take contracts into account and things like that. Does he have the confidence if he goes on loan? I mean, like, how do you pull him back in type of a situation? So we'll have to see. So where did you land? Oh, yeah, loan. You think he'll go on loan again? Yeah. Armando Bruno. Another
one who was lights out August, September, October last season, and still continues to be for Albania, which is something that shouldn't go unsaid. Southampton were pretty much on the beach from February onwards. They finished a lot further down the table than anyone realised, but I don't think they cared because they were never in relegation trouble. They just phoned it in, and it's really hard to continue to impress in that environment for a young Loanee. Whether he's ready to come back to Chelsea, I don't think anyone's fooling themselves into saying he can come back now and be Chelsea's number 9. That's not what we're talking about with Armando. If you have a nominal centre forward, whether it's Kai Havertz or somebody else who is your first choice, how many games do you then have for your so-called backup number 9, your rotation option, your impact sub? Armando can be all of those things to Chelsea in the right team if you put him on as a substitute in the last 20 minutes with hard, aggressive running, that attitude that he showed when he's at his very best for Southampton. He can score Premier League goals. He can't necessarily lead the line for Chelsea right now, but that's not what you ask him to do. He's been outstanding at every step up, from under 18s to under 21s to Vitesse to Southampton to Albania, at all these age groups, that you can't write him off, because the moment you do that, he'll embarrass you. A lot of what happens with Armando is going to be impacted by what Chelsea do in the market. If Lukaku goes, which it looks like it's going to happen because Lukaku wants it to happen, you then have Havertz and theoretically Timo Werner as your centre-forward options, but we've seen that Tuchel doesn't really prefer to use... He's used Pulisic as a central striker option more than he has Timo Werner. Do you then bring somebody else in? Whether it's a loan option, a backup option... Do you bring Michy Batshuayi back in? He's still contracted to the club. I don't think anyone thinks that's going to happen. But then if Armando is your default backup striker, you find a way to use him meaningfully over the course of the season, and you probably get a decent return for him. If he goes on loan, no shortage of takers, but what are you going to ask of him from a second Premier League loan that Southampton didn't ask of him? You'd ask him to. Southampton used him mainly as their focal point number 9, as a channel runner, as a hold up man, as a goal scorer, as a transition forward. If you loan him again, you need to ask him to do more. But then your scope narrows of the number of clubs. Who's better than Southampton, but outside the top 6? You might be looking at 3 or 4 clubs, and those 3 or 4 clubs might not want to take him on loan. You only get 2 loan spots as a Premier League club. And then you're looking at potentially selling, and he'll carry market value as well. And he's one that I could see Chelsea selling, whether I agree with it or not. I sort of floated the idea mid-season that if you were determined to get Livramento from Southampton a year ahead of a buyback clause being available, if you wanted to get him this summer, you can come to the table by saying, well, hold on, you've got Armando. Is there a deal to be done where we take Livramento back and you get Armando on a permanent? Now, that's a non-starter because Tino is out for the rest of the year with a knee injury. But he's one that I really don't know, because I could see him playing 20-odd games as a rotation forward for Chelsea and being all right with it. But just as easily, I could see Chelsea saying, well, somebody's offering 25 plus 5, and that probably suits them. We've seen them do it before.
Yeah, it's going to be tough for him, but Lukaku moves, you have someone else. And again, I know Tuchel's probably trying to maximize his window, but, you could do a hell of a lot worse. What about Levi Colwill? So much chat about him this season, absolutely tearing it up at Huddersfield. Look, if you hold on to the one time you watched him play in the championship final and an own goal, you're doing yourself a disservice. So, I mean, Phil, I know we play with emotion a lot here, but I guess you've seen him. Is he good enough to come in and fill in for the Rudiger, Christensen, potentially Aspie and Alonso size gap in our defense?
If Mark Guehi was good enough to step up from the Championship last season and do what he did at Crystal Palace, if Fikayo Tomori was good enough to step up from the Championship to do what he did with Chelsea in Lampard's first season, then Levi Colwill is more than ready. He was every bit as good as either of those 2 players in the Championship. Own goal be damned in the playoff final, he was one of the best players on the pitch. Chelsea don't have a proper left-sided centre-half option. They have Malang Sarr, who with the best will in the world is not going to start the majority of matches in the Premier League next season. But we know that they're looking in the market, whether they're looking at Koulibaly, whether they're looking at Gvardiol or any other left-sided centre-half option. But you've got this potential superstar talent ready to return. It's easy to loan out again. We've seen them do it time and time again, but the most important part of any loan progression is to capture the momentum when it's at its highest. And that, as much as anything, is what the first season of the Lampard era did so well. It made sure that when Reece James came back from Wigan, yes, he was injured, but he was so good at Wigan that you have to keep that momentum going into the first team. Mount and Tomori at Derby, you have to keep the momentum going, because if that momentum is carried into another loan, it's very easy for it to stall. We saw it go back a decade. Nathaniel Chalobah was among the best players in the Championship in his age 18 season on loan at Watford. They lost the playoff final to Crystal Palace that year. And Chalobah was ready to go back to pre-season at Chelsea. And Mourinho was like, no, one more year. They sent him on loan to the Championship again with Nottingham Forest in a midfield that barely saw the ball under Billy Davies. If you get it wrong, you've ruined all the good work up until this point. And yeah, fine, maybe you can find a loan in the Premier League for Colwill, but like we were saying with Broja, you've got a very narrow scope of options there, and those teams will just as much want to sign him permanently as they will take him on loan, because you're ultimately doing somebody else's job for them, and the loan is a bit of a last resort. Levi is under a long-term contract, if I can get my words out, but he knows that he's got options this summer that he can parlay into the next step in his career. Guehi now plays for England. A year ago, he just played for Swansea, losing the playoff final to Brentford and making mistakes in that final. I think people now recognise that selling him was a mistake, whether or not he's ready for Chelsea. Chelsea have let numerous centre-halves go in the last 12 months, and they had these homegrown England internationals at no cost on their books that they're now regretting selling. And I desperately hope that Colwill isn't the next in that line, because he's ready to play a role for Chelsea this season. He's not necessarily ready to replace Rudiger straight away, but if you bring him in, you get to January, you watch the difference between Colwill from August to January and January to May if he plays for Chelsea, because this time next summer you're talking a Rudiger replacement for sure.
I love it. Love the bullishness. What about Toni Andrean? Had a bit of a rough season, right? Started in Russia, came back, ended up at Huddersfield with Levi, injuries. It was almost kind of like he lost out on the entire year.
Yeah, and that's really unfortunate, because we've seen what a transcendent talent he can be, not just in the academy, but he scored in the Europa League this season. That isn't something first-time loanees do. Broke his foot when he was out there, cut the loan short, went to Huddersfield. And again, just the injuries that come along at the wrong time have sort of dogged him for the last 2-3 years. And when he gets on the pitch for Huddersfield, among the best players, I don't really understand why he didn't get on during the playoff final. They needed a goal. They were losing. He's a player who can flick a switch and get you back into the game. I think it's going to have to be another loan next year, unless he's another one who's got options to go somewhere else. We know that the move to Russia came with an option to buy that wasn't taken up, but you want to see him put a season together of form and fitness to justify the talent that's there. There's no denying any of that, and it's just unfortunate that we're at the end of another season where injuries have impacted the player that he can be, because if he'd have had the season expected, whether or not Locomotive were triggering an option to buy or not, he's a potential future first-team player at Chelsea, talent-wise. The opportunity just hasn't come to him because of injuries yet.
So what are you thinking? Where do we put him? On loan again?
I think it is loan again, unless he feels the time has come to explore a permanent move elsewhere. There was talk that Southampton were interested. Of course, Southampton were interested. They're interested in everyone from Cobham. Tino will be 21 in November. It's a big season for him personally, whether he takes one last swing at the loan move with the eyes on a Chelsea integration afterwards, because we know that it's just one step away. Or whether there's a market that he wants to pursue this summer.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Dujon Sterling, we talked about potentially needing depth at the right wing back spot. Do you think he's ready?
I think he's ready to be a rotation option if Tuchel wants him to. He had a long look at him last summer. It was important that he went to Blackpool on loan and got to play, because he spent a long time during COVID not able to get on the training pitch at all. Dujon is what he is at this point. He is a physical presence along the right side. You can do a lot with him in other positions. You can play him as a right centre half. You can play him as a centre forward if you want to. But if you're losing Azpilicueta, or even if you're keeping Azpilicueta and making him a full-time right centre half and don't let him be wing back anymore, you've got someone like Dujon as a backup for Reece, who can bring some of what Reece brings in terms of physicality, in terms of impacting the game in both halves. He's learned a lot out on loan at Coventry and Blackpool about the art of defending. And that's not just defending 1v1. That's stuff like, here comes a long goal kick from the goalkeeper. Those long goal kicks go out to the touchline. You're the fullback or you're the wingback. You've got to get up and head. You've got to get up and beat whoever's competing for it, so that your team faces the better odds of winning that second ball. He's learnt a lot of that out on loan right now. Yes, it's a step to go from the Championship to the Premier League, but nobody's asking him to come in and replace Reece James. They're asking him to be an option. And if the market doesn't come to Chelsea with a wing-back, they've been talking about Serginho Dest, who'd be an option to play both sides, but Dujon can play both sides and doesn't cost you anything. It returns to this debate, this discussion that we've been having. You've got a finite number of resources to fill all your gaps this summer, and there are more gaps being created than you can fill with your budget. And if you've got a Sterling, if you've got a Gallagher, if you've got a Broja, you owe it to them to consider what you have first. I think he's probably the most likely of this group to do a Chalobah and surprise people, to stick around and play a little bit more than most people think, and play a lot better than most people probably think he can as well.
Okay. Ethan Ampadu, I just actually saw a tweet from Absolute Chelsea saying that his player radar stats were actually really, really close to Tchouaméni. The big difference was he was just at the bottom of Serie A, struggling with Venezia all season. He kind of divided opinion on us on the KSL, but to be quite honest, I watched 0 minutes of Venezia and could not tell you a thing.
They weren't a good team, and he played all over the pitch for them. He played at right back, he played in midfield, he played at centre half. He did another one of those players that's not necessarily a Chelsea Academy produced player. We signed him at 16 from Exeter, and they take the largest portion of the credit for his development. But Chelsea have used him in several different ways as well. For a long time under Antonio Conte, he was a centre half. And I've been on record for a long time as thinking that he does his best work in midfield, not just because he slightly lacks the stature to be a centre half at the top level, but because when you watch what he does well, it all favours a buccaneering midfield role. He flies into tackles, he wins possession, he can distribute, he can play off either foot, he can get up and down. He's got vision, he's got an engine. And I think that's what expected Chelsea's stats showed distilled into a radar form, that he's a very well-rounded central midfielder when he plays in central midfield. And like we're talking with Sterling, if you can come back in this summer and be an option to Tuchel as a centre-half, as a midfielder, as an emergency wide fullback option, then the chances of you sticking around are higher than normal. And Ampadu's had more varied loans than I think anybody properly realises. He spent a year at Leipzig, didn't play a lot. He spent a year at Leipzig learning, playing under the German model. Then he spent a year at Sheffield United playing a full Premier League season, which isn't something a lot of Loanees do. And now he's gone to Italy, another environment where any Chelsea youngster who's been to Italy on loan or otherwise has extolled the virtues of playing over there for the tactical education it gives you. Chalobah played at Napoli. Tomori and Abraham are both over there right now. Jeremy Boga's been over there for a while. The tactical education you get from playing in Serie A raises your game that little bit further. And you can't underestimate Ampadu in that. He's going to the World Cup with Wales. And he's played a really important role in doing that and being the foundation of this team that's gotten to the Euros and then gotten to the World Cup. He made his debut for them at 17. He was in their squad at 16. He's been a core part of that process. You've now had loans in 3 separate European top-flight leagues and you're still 22 years old. He's just as likely to do a Chalobah as Sterling, possibly more likely, because he's had this experience behind him now. And I would integrate him because I think it's such an easy win to do. But I'm not sure they'd loan him again if they don't integrate him. I think there would be a clear market and teams queuing up to sign him, because I think you could probably sign him for cheaper than Brozier, Gilmour or Gallagher, as we discussed earlier. Just the perception of Ampadu is almost that out of sight, out of mind thing. If you've been on loan in a league that isn't the Premier League, a lot of people think, okay, fine, he's clearly on the way out, rather than Gallagher, who's clearly on the ascent. But they both played to a high standard in top-flight European leagues this year for a different range of teams. Billy Gilmour played for a relegated team. Ampadu played for a relegated team. 2 different countries, but people would position Gilmour higher up. Gilmour's not going to the World Cup. Ampadu is. Scotland and Wales, relatively similar stature countries who both had the same sort of chances of qualifying. They both had to beat Ukraine to get there. They would have played in the playoff final against each other had Scotland beat Ukraine. So from those 2 perspectives, I think it's doing Ampadu a disservice to suggest that he's not as deserving of a place in the squad as Billy Gilmour, for example.
All right. Well, that'll be good. We had a lot of mixed decisions on him, mainly because we just weren't aware. But what about Ian Matson? Again, as we're talking about depth, we used to have 3 wing backs. Now we have potentially 1. Who knows what Palmieri's going to do? It sounds like Alonso's ready to go. What's Ian Matson's future look like in your eyes?
Interesting one, because he's done well. He's had that loan at Charleston, then he had the loan at Coventry. Tick the boxes in the 3rd tier and the 2nd tier, and ideally you now want him to play at a higher level. Marcos Alonso's on the way out. There's an option to come in and back up Chilwell. Again, if Sterling hangs around as your backup on both sides, then Matson can go away and get that loan. I think we're talking a loan again here entirely. There was that early summer link with Dortmund, and that's developed into a link now with Feyenoord, which is the club we signed him from in the first place. They were Europa League finalists this year, I believe. So he'd be going into a high-level setup there. Both of those moves were linked with options to buy, though. And once you start linking an option to buy into a player who's going on an overseas loan, you're starting talking about the exit door. And particularly if you're going back to the club that you spent your the majority of his development at. He was there from a young age right through to 16 when Chelsea signed him. A little bit short in stature, not short in quality. Probably not quite at Chelsea's level right now, but he's another one that if you brought him in and gave him the opportunity to play 20, 25 games in a variety of minutes, cup matches, League Cup matches, some Champions League group games, bring him on in the right scenario, you get that rapid acceleration and development. I'm always going to be inclined to integrate as many of these boys as possible, but it's not always realistic. So I think we're talking loan again here, and the club might be considering selling. If you include an option to sell, we know from recent history they probably try to negotiate a buyback. I'd rather take our chances with him, but I'm not sure it's going to happen.
All right. I understand. And then lastly, we got a couple GKs. Look, if Kepa is angling for a move to be a starter, which totally understand from his perspective, you've got Bettinelli, which shout out to Yannick, who called us out for forgetting that Mendy is technically months older than Bettinelli. He's not the old veteran goalkeeper that we all assumed he was. There's a real opportunity for a number 2 role. Do you think one of the academy on loan goalkeepers are ready for a number 2 position behind Mendy?
Ready, yes. Whether it's the right thing to do or not, I don't know. Jamie Cummings shouldn't be considered. He needs to go on another loan. He's following the pathway that Baxter has forged before him. He was outstanding for Gillingham last season in the first half. Then he went to Milton Keynes and played a big part in their promotion push. He was one of the best goalkeepers in League One, and there'll be numerous championship or equivalent options for him this summer, and that's the right course for him at this time of his career. Now, Nathan Baxter is a little bit older, I believe 23 now, and he's been through every conceivable loan up to the top of the championship, top half of the championship. Played for Hull last season, was very, very good there. Didn't play the whole season for them, but when he played, he got into the team and kept his starting job. And now you're talking about the opportunity to come back and be a backup at Chelsea. Bettinelli's the perfect backup third choice. He's homegrown, doesn't take up a foreign slot, happy to serve in that role, clearly very good off the pitch. His dad is a long-time successful goalkeeping coach, mostly associated with Fulham, where obviously Bettinelli came from. I thought some of those traits have already made its way down to Marcus. As that backup goalkeeper, that third, fourth choice, you're as much of a coach and a confidant to the other goalies as you are anything else, and he's clearly really well suited to that. When you have a young goalkeeper come into that, they've got that ambition and fire to want to play as often as possible. And if you're Nathan and you've gone through and you've played well over 150, close to 200 senior games in your career at this age, to suddenly have that come to a halt and play less than 10. We'll talk about Quaveen Kelleher at Liverpool, who he's clearly the backup goalkeeper to Alisson there. He got some good cup opportunities, was the League Cup final hero against Chelsea, but he played fewer than 10 matches last season. He's now a full international for the Republic of Ireland. But what could he have done elsewhere? Would he want to play more than those 10 matches? It's not going to be a long-time arrangement. And he hadn't been out on loan before that. He's just come through and got him steady opportunities. It would be a really jarring thing for Baxter's development if he was to go in and become a backup at Chelsea and suddenly not play as often. Now, he's a very ambitious young goalkeeper who's always said that he backs himself to play for Chelsea one day. And I think he has all the talent in the world to be able to give that a great crack. He was talking when he signed his long-term contract a few years ago, that when it came to an end, it would be closer to the end of Kepa's mammoth 7-year contract, and maybe he'd be in a position to take over from him. He didn't expect Kepa to fall off quite as early as possible, and then nobody would have foreseen at that point that you'd sign Edu Mendy and he'd become the top-class goalkeeper that he's become at Chelsea. It's a really hard one for Baxter, because if he's not going to be considered for really meaningful minutes at Chelsea, then another loan at the Championship level isn't really the best move, because you've already proven that you can play at Championship level. You want the Premier League to be your next step, but young goalkeepers don't get loaned in by Premier League clubs. The exceptions to the rule, there's like 2 of them over the last decade, and Dean Henderson is one of those. And the only reason Dean Henderson got a Premier League loan when he did is because the team he was playing for got promoted. If Hull had been promoted last season with Nathan Baxter on loan, you renew that arrangement happily, and then you get the Premier League opportunity. but the Premier League loan isn't going to be forthcoming for him. So you then consider whether it's the right step for him to be transitioning into a backup at a very young age, or whether he goes and searches for the Premier League opportunity on a permanent basis. You've seen Southampton sign Gavin Bazunu, Ireland international from Manchester City, who spent the year on loan at Portsmouth in League One, a standard that Nathan's already excelled at. That's another opportunity gone already. It's a really tough one. I don't think he's best served by being a backup, as much as I'd love to see him be a backup and then get the opportunity to play and impress, because he's been on such a unconventional journey for a young goalkeeper, especially at Chelsea. And it would be amazing to see a young goalkeeper come through at Chelsea and follow all of the outfielders. It's so hard for a goalkeeper. There's one spot to do it in. I can't call this one, but my instinct is that he's more likely to go than he is to stay. And you've got the rumours now linking Chelsea with Strakosha from Lazio as that veteran backup goalkeeper in the Caballero mode. I know he's a little bit younger, but you start to wind down your career and be happy to be a backup at a top club, knowing that if the opportunities to play, he's an experienced international, he's played tons of Serie A minutes, you're in good hands with him. It's a risk for Tuchel as well to say to Baxter, here you go. If Eddie Mendy gets injured, you're our guy. I think he'd do well, but I don't think that's a risk that many people at Chelsea would be willing to take, as good as I think Baxter is.
The first signing of every newly promoted team is usually a goalkeeper, because that's one of the biggest areas you can make a large improvement upon. And it is that crucial, right? Fine margins when it comes to Premier League for newly promoted teams. So I totally understand where you're coming from for that. It's going to be tough. I think both of them should continue on their journey. You bring in someone who's an older second string, so that way they see that you're not bringing in another Kepa on a 7-year contract, and that, in a couple years at most, there will be another opportunity for them. And we'll have to see how that plays out. All right, we've got some awards. We'll kind of rip through these pretty quick, Phil. It's all going to be you. I've got nothing to add on this one. But again, like we did with the men's and women's team, we've got some awards to run through. So the U23 Player of the Season from the Dev Squad. Who did you have?
Harvey Vale won the Academy Player of the Year award, and very deserved it was too. He was the top goal scorer for the top goal contributor for the development squad. I should correct myself. Jay Wareham was the top goal scorer. And Harvey was good. He had a really strong start and a pretty strong finish. But I was looking at somebody who played the whole core of the season, and I came back to Dion Rankin, who I think had a really, really solid year playing on the right flank. He was a threat more often than not when he was on the ball. His game came on leaps and bounds for somebody who moved around a little bit from side to side in under-18 football. He spent most of this season playing on the right wing. Impactful, got goals, scored the all-important equaliser on the last day, and helped change that game as a substitute. I think, given that the team struggled, it's hard to find an obvious standout in that team, and it was heavily rotated. But I keep coming back to Dion, who had a really good year, and I think he deserves that recognition, at least from me.
Oh, I like it. What about the U18 Player of the Season?
There were a lot of options here, and I've gone for Leo Carsedine, who 11 goals, 9 assists, played pretty much as often as anybody else did. Leader, captain, relentless presser, versatility, and doesn't turn 17 until the end of August, so pretty much the youngest in the group. Signed from Wimbledon, the academy that Mark Robinson helped develop. He signed from Wimbledon a couple of years ago. He'll play for the Dev Squad a little bit to start the season next year, and then he'll be well on his way by the end of it. He's a really, really class act who can do a lot of things that the modern game demands of you. Scored in the Under-18 Cup final, led by example, productive. Yeah, very, very good season.
I loved it. Love to hear it. Who's your most improved from the academy this season?
I'm going to go with Malik Motherstill for this one, because his first year as a scholar at Chelsea, he was on loan to Derby for the second half of it. He didn't play very much in the first half of it, and there were clearly some areas of his game that he needed to work on, and he went to Derby and he did well. He scored half a dozen goals and he came back. And he was the under-18's top scorer by a long way this year. 16 goals, plenty of assists, looked a real threat, matured. Link-up play was good, transition play was good, finishing was good, attitude was good. And given that he didn't play as much in that first year as he ended up doing in the second year, I think that's the improvement that you want. Some players hit the ground running, like a Lewis Hall. Bang, you're into the first year of your scholarship, you're into the development squad, you're into the under-19s, you're playing in the first team. Some of them are on that slower curve where that first year is spent not playing. You need to adjust your body, you need to train, you need to figure out the positions, and then very rare for somebody to go on loan from Chelsea at under-18 level, but he made the most of it, came back and said, right, this is who I am. Very well done for him.
All right. Yeah, I mean, kudos to him stepping up in a year of growth. What about one to watch in the upcoming 2022-2023 season?
For this one, I'm going to say Gilmour, the Finnish midfielder. I say midfielder because he can do a lot of things. He has played at centre-half, he's played at left-back, he's played a number of different midfield roles. He started the season number 10. Very Havertz-esque, tall, upright, powerful, left-footed orchestrator, powerful shot on him. Then he got injured, and this has been the story of his 2 years at England. He's been out injured or unavailable for more of it than he hasn't. And then he finished the season playing as a holding 6 or an 8 in this 3-4-3 that the academy used as well. And he can do so much. He can control the game. He can transition and break lines. He can pass. He can shoot. He can dribble. He can really, really do a lot. He's got this better developed physique than a lot of 17, 18-year-olds have. And he's now exhausted his youth team eligibility, so he'll go into the development squad. But if he can stay fit and available, he can do so much with that talent. He's got all the ability you want, and I can see why Chelsea signed him. It's really hard for anybody who's come in from overseas over the last couple of years under COVID restrictions. You come in and you can't explore your new city, your new home because of lockdowns or limitations. And it's even harder when you're in a professional club. You might have your options even further limited because you've got a game here and training here, and you can't risk bringing something into the building. You can't go home and see your family, and you're a 16-year-old abroad. This is really, really hard for anybody who's come abroad. So I think everyone had to be patient with the likes of him and Edwin Anderson, Sami Senglani, and everybody else. But if you can keep Jimmy fit, if you can keep him available going into the development squad season, the world is his oyster. There's so much talent in that boy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, exciting things. Again, dealing with injuries is not easy. So we'll have to see. All right. Last two. Here we go. Goal of the season. Who do you have?
Ed Brand gave this to Ronnie Stutter for a really, really well-worked goal away to Tottenham. Passing broken out from the back. They went through midfield, out wide to Brodie Hughes on the overlap on the right. He played a first-time through ball, across the pitch. Ronnie Stutter touch and finish. Beautiful team goal. Epitomised the ethos of the way the academy want to play football. The club included Harvey Vale's goal against Blackpool in the Youth Cup in their overall goal of the season. It was reminiscent of Hakim Ziyech against Tottenham, this whipped, brilliant goal from the edge of the box into the far top corner. I'm going for Tudor Mendelodowa's goal away to Crystal Palace, which was in the academy top 10 goals of the season. It was the goal that I remember getting me out of my seat and saying, oh, wow, what have I just seen? Lewis Hall transitioned with the ball between the two boxes, broke out 40, 50-yard run and then played Tudor in. And Tudor let the ball come across his body and then just arrowed a beautiful left-footed shot into the far top corner. And this was just as he was starting to break into the under-18 team. It was... He'd missed the start of the year injured, then he comes in and suddenly has this performance against Palace that makes you sit up and take notice. And that goal, I see it vividly from the touchline. I was thinking there were very few moments like that would elicit that reaction. Harvey's was amazing. I was sat in the East Lower behind that goal, and from the moment he struck it, you knew that was going in. Such an elegant goal, but I'm just going to give the edge to Tudor.
I like it. You know, a little off the cuff there, but technically proficient. And then finally, your last big one, moment of the season.
Not that we want to celebrate avoiding relegation, but there was nothing quite like the scenes when Joe Haig scored against Tottenham on that last game of the year, the first team were all there. The stands were packed at Cobham with families and friends and scouts and everybody else. And the tension and the drama of that whole day and the despair that going 1-0 down, and then you've got the equaliser with a little bit of hope. And I think that moment meant so much to so many people that there's no other option. It was relief, ecstasy, despair, all of it coming into one. It was everything that football does so well. You don't want to go through that again to celebrate relegation, but it's not a moment I'm going to forget anytime soon. It was truly something.
Look, the photos that we got from that, Tuchel, Mason, like you said, I think JT was in the stands. There were a lot of people there. Spurs adds an extra edge to it, and thankfully,
always.
Yeah, they were interested but not up for it, which is good. So, that was pretty tense, but we got through it thankfully in the end. So Phil, thanks so much for the insight and the expertise in sharing that with us.
It's always a pleasure, and I can't believe that the season finished more than a month ago, and I also can't believe that the next season's about to start, and before very long we'll be talking everything 22-23 and what to expect from the new season. Looking forward to that.
You're not wrong. But until then, we'll take a little bit of a break, reset, see how the roster shuffle up, and we'll be back definitely to cover the preseason and what to expect as the early kickoff to the season is right around the corner at the beginning of August. So anyways, that's going to wrap us up. As always, Chelsea fans, go follow Phil on Twitter at Chelsea Youth. But that's going to wrap us up today. So until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.